It all began with a pair of shoes. A pair of shoes that belonged to Thomas Howell. Thomas received the shoes on his 12th birthday, and oh, they were marvelous shoes, sturdy walking boots made of the finest leather in town. "Now you can get to school without getting blisters on your feet," said his mother. "It is an awfully long way to school, you know." Thomas's mother was right. They lived way out in the country across town, and it was indeed a very long way for Thomas to walk. So the first day of school came, and putting on his new leather shoes, Thomas hitched a pack over his shoulder and began on his way. It was cold and dark. The moon still glinted in the early morning sky, and Thomas's new shoes crunched on the rocky pathway beneath him. Crunch, 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 and a cold wind blew across his face. He tugged his jacket closer as he walked along the pathway to school. And then, quite suddenly, there before Thomas loomed a bridge, a long, rotting wooden bridge with a thin mist laying draped across it, like a thin, cold blanket of ice. Black moss stretched across it, and a murky, muggy, eerie stench seemed to seep from the boards filling the air. It creaked in the wind, and it smelled of age and decay. Thomas didn't like the looks of this bridge at all. He didn't want to take a step close to it. He wanted to run away, far, far away. But he knew no other way to school, so he took a deep breath and walked toward the bridge, step by step. Crunch, crunch, crunch. He was about to take a first step onto the wooden boards when suddenly a white, gnarled hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Thomas spun around. And there, standing behind him, grasping his wrist in her vice-like grip, was a withered old lady with a face as ancient as the bridge itself, brown and rotting like a crab apple. "Come with me," she rasped, and she dragged him toward her shack that was nestled between two twisted oak trees. She pulled him inside and pushed him into a chair. "What were you thinking?" she hissed at him. "Were you actually thinking about crossing the bridge in those?" Thomas looked to where she was pointing. She was pointing at his shoes. My shoes?" stammered Thomas. "Yes, your shoes," rasped the old woman. "Haven't you heard of Scritch-Scratch?" Scritch-Scratch?" asked Thomas. "Shh," whispered the old lady. "He might hear you." "Who's Scritch-Scratch?" asked Thomas. Said the old lady. "Scritch-Scratch is the creature that lives beneath the bridge. He waits for unwary travelers to come across, and when they do, he gets them." Now Thomas was getting a little more nervous. "Well, why do they call him Scritch-Scratch?" he asked. "Oh, they call him Scritch-Scratch," said the old lady, "because that is the sound he makes as he crawls across the bridge. His skin is so rough and so coarse that it rubs like sandpaper across the wooden boards. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch." Now Thomas was very, very afraid. "What does he look like?" he asked. "Oh," said the old lady, "that no one quite knows, but we do know this." She lowered her voice so low that Thomas had to lean forward to listen to her rattled words. "He cannot see, for he has no eyes. He cannot smell, for he has no nose. He cannot taste, for he has no tongue. And he cannot feel, for he has no heart. But," the old lady paused, "he has one crooked ear on the top of his head, and if you make one sound on his bridge, he will hear you, and he will come come and get you. Well, I have to get across that bridge, said Thomas. It's the only way that I know. There has to be a way across. Tell me. Well, there is one way, said the old lady. Tell me, please, said Thomas. It would be advisable not to go across that bridge, said the old lady, but if you must, here is how. You must take both shoes off of your feet, and then carrying them in your hands, you must tread ever so carefully across the wooden boards, taking care not to make one single sound. Tiptoe ever so carefully, and then, when you have reached the end of the bridge, and only then, you may put your shoes back on your feet and proceed on your way. Well, that's easy, said Thomas. Well, I must be going now. Goodbye. Goodbye, said the old lady. Thomas didn't like how final she said goodbye. But he walked to the end of the bridge, and he did just what she said. He took both of his shoes off, one by one, and carrying them in his hands, he stepped onto the bridge. Carefully, ever so carefully, he tread across those floorboards, careful not to make a sound. He tiptoed across. And he made it. He made it to the end of the bridge. Triumphantly, he put his shoes back on and proceeded on his way to school. From behind him, the old lady watched, shaking her head from side to side. Well, weeks passed, and every day Thomas crossed the bridge on his way to school and on the way back, doing just what the old ladies had said. He took off both of his shoes before crossing the bridge and only put them back on when he had reached the safety at the end of the bridge. And this went on for quite some time. Until one foggy day in October, a thick fog so dense and so cold that you could almost taste it on your tongue. This day, Thomas was running late for school. He hurried on his way. He raced down the rocky pathway. Crunch, 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 crunch. Went his shoes against the rocky pathway. Crunch, 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 crunch. And it was so foggy in front of him, Thomas could barely see in front of him. He could barely see his own shoes beneath his feet. Crunch, 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 crunch. Down the rocky pathway he raced. But then, suddenly, the noises changed. Clump, 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 clump. Thomas halted to a stop. His heart stammered to a stop. His breath caught his throat and froze there. He looked down, and instead of seeing a rocky pathway beneath his feet, he saw the wooden boards of a bridge. The bridge of Scritch-Scratch. He waited. He waited for the sound of a creature to come creeping beneath the bridge. He waited for those sounds that he knew would come. But no sounds came at all. Nothing happened. All was quiet and still. Oh, what an idiot I've been, said Thomas, believing that old lady. There isn't a creature who lives underneath here. What a fool I've been. And confidently, he walked forward. Clump, 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 clump. He was halfway across when he heard it. Scritch, scratch. Was he imagining things? Surely he was imagining things. He walked forward. Clump, 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 clump. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. The sound seemed to be coming from behind him. Thomas walked faster. Clump, 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 clump. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. The noises were coming faster now. Thomas walked even faster. Clump, 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 clump. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. Thomas was running now. Clump, 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 clump. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. And Thomas was running as fast as he could now. He was running for his life. He could see the end of the bridge. He was almost there. And then... scratch. In the morning, the old lady came out of her shack. She walked to the end of the bridge. and she looked out. And there she saw, hanging by their laces from the railing of the bridge, a pair of new leather